Good morning. Welcome to another Library Adventures Live. My name is Linda and I'm one of 12 librarians who look after Kirklees libraries. Now, last week we were joined by the lovely Susanna Hubbard. Susanna's author and illustrator and talked to us about a book, The Problem with Pierre. Problem with Pierre is a picture book for 3 to 6 year olds. It was written by C.K. Samoa, but it was beautifully illustrated by Susanna. The book's about Bertram and Alan, who are next door neighbours, and they're also great friends. But they are very, very different from one another. Bertram's neat as a pin. He says there's a place for everything and everything in its place. And Alan's not very neat at all. In fact, he's extremely messy and probably much more like me. There's also a cat called Pierre. Now, Susanna showed us how to draw Alan, and then she introduced her challenge, and that she'd drawn 2 rooms which were cleared of furniture and ready for us to download from Kirklees libraries. That's the normal Kirklees libraries address that we have, which is that one. So the children were going to download the picture that she'd put up there, and then they could use any materials they wanted, such as poster paint or collage. Tear that off again. To make a messy room or a tidy room. It could be a loud space, it could be a quiet space, it could be any sort of room, it could be Pierre's room. And Susanna wanted us to use our imagination to have great fun being as creative as we could. Now, this week, we have award-winning teen author, experienced school speaker, and creative workshop coordinator, Eve Ainsworth. Eve has written, I believe, 11 books for the young adult reader. In 2016, she wrote Crush, Damage and 7 Days, 2017, Tender in 2018, Lost and Because of You in 2019, Kicking Off and Just Another Little Lie in 2020, and Magpie and Perfect Shot in 2021. And she has another one coming out of July this year, which is called Know My Place. Now, I've mentioned them all on purpose because they're all such good books. And I think if you find a good book by one author, you want to go on and see what else they've written. And I would definitely be reading some of the others. So, but her work deals with some very hard-hitting subjects. We have toxic relationships in Crush. We have bullying in 7 Days and self-harm in Damage. Dealing with grief is Lost, and then domestic violence in Magpie. Now, she's here to talk today about Magpie, which is this lovely book here. And it's a companion book to the book Lost. Now, Eve said that books are a gateway to conversations, and I certainly agree with that. Now, as always, there will be a question and answer section. So if you have any questions for Eve as the session goes on this morning, just type them into the chat box and we'll be able to come back and do a question and answer with Eve as we normally do. Now, I also read that Eve loves 80s music, dogs, and naps often. So anyone who loves music, loves dogs, and naps often, what's not to like? And with that, I'd like to introduce Eve Ainsworth. Hi, Eve.
Hi, Linda. Thank you so much for having me. Lovely introduction. And yeah, I do love dogs.
What sort of a dog have you got?
He's actually laying by my feet at the moment. He's a really scruffy mix. So he's a mix of a poodle, pug, and beagle. It's called a puggle-poo.
Puggle-poo, that's fabulous.
Yeah, and he's a real messy, shaggy mess at the moment. He needs a good cut. So he's marching everywhere.
What was he called?
Woody.
Woody.
Yeah.
Right then. So if I could just start by asking you perhaps to tell us a little bit about Lost and how that fits in with Magpie, how those are linked.
Yeah, of course. So Lost is a book about grief. And the reason why I wrote that was because I was working, one of my jobs was working in a secondary school. And I was working for some time with a boy who had lost his mum. And he was a very shy, a very quiet boy. And he came into school. We knew that his mum had been quite poorly. And unfortunately, his mum did pass away. But he was still coming into school. And he used to come into school and he used to come into my office first of all. And he would come and he would sit down at my desk, and he didn't want to talk at all. He used to just come in and he used to just put his head on the desk, and he'd just sit there until the bell went for lessons to start. And I would sit with him and I would say, you know, if you want to talk to me, if you want to just be quiet, whatever you want to do. And one time he lifted his head up and he said, my dad says I shouldn't talk, I shouldn't cry, I've just got to be strong.
No.
And it really stayed with me. Now, this boy did get help. We did refer him to counselling, and actually we referred his dad to counselling as well. And the two of them got the help that they needed. But it was just the comment that stayed with me, that I need to be strong because I'm a boy. And around the same time, I mean, I think you've got the slide there of Prince Harry that I sent you, when his mum died, when Princess Diana died. Around the same time, Prince Harry was doing loads of interviews about mental health and about how he was struggling with mental health and how he was struggling when he was younger. I think it might be slide 5, Linda.
That's it.
This one there. Yeah.
So
you can see Prince Harry in the slide here, the younger boy. So he was about 9 or 10 when Princess Diana died, and he was told when his mum died that he couldn't show his grief, he couldn't show his emotions, he had to be strong. And there's him in the public eye, all eyes on him, the whole world's eyes on him. And he was told that he shouldn't cry, he had to be strong, he was a boy, he was a man. You know, this is very much a message that we give to young boys, especially that, you know, grief is actually a negative thing. And it's so bad that we're still saying this to boys. So that's kind of how Loss came about. You know, I had this character in my mind, a very alpha boy, you know, loves his football, very popular. And then something really tragic happens to him. His mum becomes very ill, and his dad and him really struggle with their emotions. They don't know how to deal with it. They don't know how to talk about it. And this kind of message about, you know, we shouldn't cry, we shouldn't talk about it is there. But then Alfie meets Alice, this new character that comes into his hometown. She's a new girl that moves in. And she helps him deal with his emotions and deal with what's going on in his life. Because it is so important that we cry. Crying is a totally natural thing to do. And, you know, it's what we're meant to do. It's what we're meant to do when things get on top of us. Boy, man, whatever, we need to be able to show our emotions. So that's what Loss is all about. It's about making sure that we're saying to boys that this is a healthy outlet. And actually, it doesn't matter who you are. If something awful is happening to you, you need to be able to talk about it, and you need to be able to show your emotions. So that's how Loss came about. So very much influenced by, you know, what I was seeing in the news and what I was working with.
So and then the subject of Magpie and how those two are linked.
So
if I'll take myself out, and then if you want to, I'll put the slides up as you want them. So if we go just to you,
thank you. Take it through. Lovely. So what we can do is we can go right back to the beginning of my writing journey. So if you go back to slide 1. So I mean, I've been writing since I was little, because a lot of people ask me, how long have you been writing for? Have you been writing, you know, for a little while? But I have literally been writing since I was a really small child. And what I used to do was I used to run around my back garden and I used to talk out loud to, like, I don't know, the birds and the squirrels. This was before I could even write. So my whole family used to think I was completely mad because I was talking to myself all the time. And actually, the character of Alice in Magpie, I think, probably is a little bit of me, because she's a bit of a free spirit and she loves being outside in the fresh air. And that was me. I was always outside. I was always getting muddy, and I was always telling stories out loud. That's what I was doing. And then when I was about 5 or 6, my brother, when I was a bit older, actually about 7, my brother brought home this typewriter that you can see on screen. Now, a lot of you might not have ever seen one of these, because they are quite old-fashioned. But when I was young, this was really, really big deal, this coming home, because I came, and this is really important to my story as well. I came from quite a poor family, so we didn't have a lot of money. And, you know, it could be quite a struggle sometimes. We didn't always have, like, the best clothes, or, you know, my mum struggled to get everything in. Sometimes, you know, we didn't you know, she struggled to get food in sometimes. It could be a real struggle. So for my brother to be able to find a typewriter, and I think he literally found it probably in a skip or something, because it was battered, it didn't work very well. But I was so excited because it meant that I could type up my first ever story. But it didn't work very well because the keys were really, really sticky. So I had to really bang the keys. And I know we were talking just at the beginning of the show about me loving dogs. And my first ever dog, who was called Dana, she was very young then, so I'd only just got her. So she was quite a young dog. And she was completely batty. She was absolutely mad. And she used to bark at anything. And she used to bark when I used to hit the keys, because I think they made quite a horrible sort of noise, like a clunky noise. So I'd hit the keys and the dog would bark. And my dad, who was a bit grumpy, he would like shout at the dog because she was barking. And then my mum would shout at my dad because he was shouting at the dog. And it was just crazy because I was trying to type out stories in this crazy sort of situation. But I would still manage to do it. I managed to type up my first ever story on this clunky old typewriter, which was called Muddles the Mouse. And it was a really, I can't even remember much about it, but it was just this adventure story about a mouse. And I think he did all these mystery adventures. He used to change costumes and all sorts of things. And it was all wonky and there were loads of mistakes on it. But I managed to send it off to a publisher that was all on the back of one of the books that I had. And it was called Penguin, the publisher. And I sent it off. And then about 3 months later, I got this big box in the post. And there were some books in it. And there was this lovely letter that I've never forgotten. I wish I'd kept it. But the letter said something along the lines of, the story was really, really good. And they loved it. And they talked about it in a meeting. And they thought that was a really good writer and that I needed to keep on writing. And more importantly, I needed to keep on reading and reading lots of different books. And though they didn't want to publish this book, they wanted me to keep writing and not give up. And I think that's something that really stayed with me. So I knew that I had to keep on trying. So that's kind of what I did. I kept on writing and writing and writing. And I kept on reading and reading and reading. So if anyone there listening is a keen writer or wants to be a writer when they're older, that's kind of what you need to do. You need to read lots of different books and you need to keep on writing, because you might get rejected along the way, but you just have to keep on going, because I've been rejected lots and lots. If we move to the next picture, which I think is a lovely, embarrassing one, you're not going to be able to see it very well because it's very, very small, but it just gives you an idea of the type of school that I went to. And what you should be able to see is that there is no school uniform there. So everybody there is dressed in quite, well, what was at the time fashionable clothes, because we are talking about the 90s here, which was a long, long time ago. And everybody there is in big trainers, designer clothes, and they're all looking, for the time, quite cool. And most of them have got good haircuts and that sort of thing. Now, I'm in the middle somewhere. Luckily, you can't really see me unless you really, really zoom in. But I mentioned before that I came from a family that didn't have much money. Now, if you go to a school that hasn't got a school uniform and you haven't got much money, that immediately creates a problem, because you're not going to have the cool school trainers. You're not going to have the cool clothes, the designer labels. And when you've got big curly hair like I've got, which you can't see today because it's all worn up, but my hair was big and bushy and frizzy, and it just made me a target immediately for bullies. So the first 2 years of secondary school for me were not good. I went to school and I had this big, like massive school bag that was from the market, I think, and it was just really tatty and not very nice. I had trainers on that weren't Nikes. They were actually called Nicks. They were like a rip-off of Nikes, and they were just not great. I had jeans that were just not designer jeans. And I just remember, like, the second day of secondary school, I was just bullied constantly. And I was shy. I wasn't able to, like, stick up for myself. So I spent a lot of my first 2 years of secondary school in the school library, where I would just read and kind of stay away from most people. But I didn't enjoy school at that stage. It wasn't until really I got into drama and things like that I kind of found my way. But you will see a lot in my books that I do talk a lot about bullying, or I talk about how it feels to be different in secondary school, because that's something that I definitely can identify with, because that's something that really had an impact on me. So secondary school, you know, is something I can really relate to, and something that had a big impact on my journey. And if we move on to the next slide. So I left school. I went on to go to university, and then for a while I was doing various different jobs. But all the while I was writing and writing and writing. But it took me a long time to actually get my first book published, which was actually in 2015. And my first book to be published is the one on the right-hand side, which is the Greenish book, 7 Days. And that book was about bullying. And I actually ended up working in the school that I left. So the school that I went to that bullied me, I actually ended up working in. And I worked as a pastoral support officer, supporting young people that were being bullied alongside other things. So it was really interesting for me, as somebody who'd been badly bullied as a young person, to actually then go into the same secondary school and work with young people and help people that were being bullied, but also work with the bullies as well. So that's how 7 Days got written. It was a book about a bully and a victim. So I was telling both sides of the story, because what I saw was that often people are bullied because there's something going on with them as well. You know, whether it be that they've got pressures at home, or whether they're having issues with their friends, maybe they've got peer pressure going on, or whether they've got self-esteem issues. There's often a reason why somebody bullies somebody else. And once you work on those issues, the bullying usually stops. So it was really interesting. It stopped my stigma about bullying as well. It made me see bullies in a different light. And actually around the same time that I was writing 7 Days, my bully, the person that bullied me really badly at school, got in touch with me. And she explained to me that when she was at school with me, her mum, her family were actually quite ill at the time. So there were reasons why she was like she was. So it's quite interesting for me that, you know, there's usually a reason why people are the way they are. And we have to explore that a little bit more, I think, when we're dealing with bullies. So that was the reason why I wrote 7 Days. And that's probably been one of my most popular books, because I think that bullying is such a topical thing. It's something we've either experienced or witnessed, or maybe we've even been bullies ourselves. So I think it's a really important book. And then after 7 Days, I wrote Crush, which is a pinkish book in the middle, which was about toxic relationships. After Crush was Damage, which is the purple book, which is about self-harm. Then Tender, which is the light blue book just next to Damage, which is about young carers, which is something else I worked with quite closely in the secondary school. And then we move on to Lost and Magpie on the left-hand side, which are the two companion books that sit side by side. So Lost, I've already mentioned, was about grief and about a young boy losing his mum, and his relationship with his dad. And Magpie is a very special book that's just come out today, about Alice. So if we skip along, I think we have to go along 2 now. That's it. So Magpie for me is a special book, I think, because Alice was a character I couldn't let go. So when I was writing Lost, Alice appears as Alfie's friend. So Alfie loses his mum, and he's going through a really difficult time. And Alice is a new girl in town, and she helps him through his really, really difficult time. And she's a really strong character. She's got lots of spirit. She seems to have a lot of confidence, and I just think she's just a really special girl. And when I was writing Lost, and when I finished Lost, I just couldn't let Alice go, and I knew that I had to tell her story as well. So that's how Magpie sort of began. And Alice has had a really difficult time as well, because she's been moving a lot. So when she moves into her new hometown where she is, it's because she's had to move away from a situation. So her stepdad is actually not a very nice person. So she's actually been living in a very difficult situation where her stepdad is not very nice. He can be quite aggressive towards her mum and quite nasty. and they kind of live in fear of the way that he is. So they've had to move away from him and run away from him. So their lives are being quite difficult. And also, coupled with this, Alice and her mum and her little brother and sister, live in poverty. They haven't got much money because of the situation that their stepdad has put them in. So the lack of money has made things really, really difficult for them. And this is something that I could really relate to because, as I've mentioned before, I didn't have a lot of money growing up. I know what it's like, you know, to be poor, if you like. And I've worked with families where there's not been a lot of money at home. I remember one family that I was working with, and the daughter, the young girl that I was working with, was talking to me, and she was saying how her mum wouldn't feed herself because she wanted to make sure that the children had enough to eat. And this girl was so worried about her mum because she said, my mum's not eating properly because she wants to make sure that we've got food, or that we can pay for the electricity, or we can pay for the gas. And she was so worried about her mum because her mum was getting thin and her mum was getting weak. So money can be a real problem. It can be a real worry for young people if they haven't got enough of it. So I really wanted to talk about, you know, what it can be like to be living somewhere where you haven't got a secure home and where you've not got a lot of money at home. But it's not all, you know, doom and gloom, because Alice is just such a special person. She's just a wonderful, you know, she's just got such a lovely spirit. She's arty, she's clever, she's kind, she loves her family, and she's very loyal. And probably out of all the characters I've written, and I've written a lot of books now, Alice is probably one of my most special ones, and maybe because she's quite close to home, but I absolutely adore her. So, you know, she is quite special to me. And if we move on to the next slide, I think it's a picture of a magpie. I mean, I love magpies. I'm looking out of my garden now, and I can actually see one, which is a bit weird, but I can actually see a magpie in my garden. But magpies I just think are a special bird anyway. And I wanted to call Magpie because I saw Alice as a magpie. And the reason is because magpies are really interesting. So some facts about magpies is that they're really, really intelligent. I mean, they're related to crows anyway. They're related to crows and ravens and that breed of bird. And crows and ravens are just, you know, amazing anyway. You can train them to do all sorts of things. I mean, some people have them as pets. You can't make a magpie a pet, though. No one's ever done that. And they've done recent studies on magpies, and they can actually recognise themselves in mirrors. So magpies have got self-awareness. They can actually see themselves and recognise themselves in a mirror. And only a few species of animal can do that. So humans, apes, dolphins and elephants are the only animals that can do that, can actually recognise themselves in a mirror and show self-awareness. So that shows you how intelligent a magpie is. They can also work with tools. They can work in teams, and some magpies can mimic speech as well, which certainly crows can do. So they're very, very intelligent. And my Alice is very intelligent, so I like that little link there. Obviously, they're very beautiful. They're very curious. They're very, very protective of their territory, which Alice is. You know, her family is all that matters to her, so she's very, very protective. They're very hard to domesticate, as I said before, so you wouldn't really be able to easily make them into a pet. And Alice is a bit like that. She's not very easy to tame and to tie down. So she struggles to fit in at school because she doesn't like to be tied down to things. She likes to do what she wants to do. But the other lovely thing is that they don't like to go very far from home. So they are very loyal to their area. And that, again, is a very close link to Alice because she likes to stay quite near to her family and her friends. She has that sort of loyalty. So I think magpies are a really special bird. And not only that, they're just so beautiful. If you look at them close up, the colours on their wings and their tail is just so unique and so pretty. It just makes them that little bit more special. And I think they're a little bit misunderstood as well. Everybody thinks they're a bit naughty and mischievous, but actually I think they're quite wise and wonderful. So I've got a real soft spot for them. And I tend to look out for them when I'm out and about. And it's just really weird that I've just seen one in the garden. I think that's a good sign. So I've got a lot of time for magpies, and that's why I've called Magpie, because I think it's a lovely name for a book. So that's really just the end of my little spiel. And obviously, questions are happy, or I can do a little reading for you.
I think a little reading would be absolutely fabulous. I've got a few questions that I was going to ask. A lot of them you've answered in the spiel. What inspired you to write Alice's story? Is this something? I mean, there are some very powerful images in the book, which can be quite upsetting for the reader. But these things, I think it's good that teenagers are exposed to this sort of thing, so that they can make their own decisions, so that they can look at relationships like the toxic relationship in Crush. Girls and boys look at life differently to when I was a teenager. And I think it's important to talk about these subjects. Do you find it difficult though? What are the boundaries when writing something like this?
I don't know. I don't think. I mean, there are certain boundaries, but I think that young people they're not as delicate as we think they are. I mean, you know, if you think about what we're exposing to TV and film and online, you know, books are a different medium altogether. And I think that it's so important that we're having these discussions because, you know, I was working with very young people that were in really, really damaging relationships, you know, awfully controlling relationships at a very, very young age. And if we're not having these talks about what a healthy relationship is at these crucial times, you know, at 11, 12, 13, if we're not having these discussions, then, you know, it can have an awful effect later on. So I think it's really, really key that we're talking about what it looks like and what a controlling, what a damaging relationship can look like. Because if we're sort of shutting down and saying, well, actually, we need to protect people, we don't want to talk about it, then, you know, we're limiting that information, really. And we're sort of denying them, you know, we're denying them that freedom of information that I think young people need. I don't think there's anything in there. I mean, there's some bits in there that might be a little bit upsetting, and I think it'd be more upsetting actually if you experienced it. That's why we do have a trigger warning there. But having spoken to and worked with young people that have experienced domestic violence, I think it's more important that it's there and it's available, because I know, having worked with young people that have experienced it, they'd rather it be there and talked about rather than ignored, because part of the problem for them is that they feel that their stories aren't being told and that we don't talk about it enough. I know only just recently, I mean, on iPlayer now, you know, trending is Ian Wright's story, and he's talking about growing up with domestic violence and the damage it's done for him. And there are adults now talking about how they grew up with it and how much of effect it's had on them and how it's affected them as parents. So if we're not having these discussions and we're not telling young people and talking to young people about what healthy relationships are now, and we've not got books reflecting that, then I think, you know, that's a real pity, because we're just missing a crucial point. So, yeah, I'm really passionate about having these types of books out there.
I think it's really valuable, because teenagers, they're just finding themselves. They don't know what's normal. They don't know what's right and what's wrong. And when something like domestic violence happens in your family, then you think it's the norm. They think it's the right thing to do. There were two little bits in the book that I found really rang true with me, because I had a friend who went through this. When they always go back, of course, they keep going back to Ross, and Ross always says, "I'm sorry, it's going to be a new start for us. It'll be different this time." Alice is saying, "But each time it's always the same thing. I'm sorry, it'll be different next time, but each time he lies." And I think it's because we want to believe in people. We want to believe that they'll change. We want to believe that we don't kind of put ourselves we don't put ourselves first, you know, as it were. And the other quote that got me was, "It's my fault I wind him up. I should know better." Exactly.
That was the key one for me. I think
that's the key. It's my fault, and it's not your fault. It's not life. It's not how it should be. It's not something that you should accept. But as teenagers, you don't know. I mean, you can look back on it when you're older, when you're adults, like and you've had life experience like I have. But when it's you when you're young, you don't understand these things, and I think that's why your books are so very, very valuable.
Thank you. I mean, I know that when Crush came out, and I was doing, obviously pre-COVID, but I was doing a lot of talks in secondary schools and asking, teenagers directly what they thought controlling relationships were, and having, frank discussions about the types of control there is. And so many just don't know. They just don't know the different forms of control that there can be. And when you're having those discussions, and I had, teens contacting me afterwards and saying, thank you, I didn't know, and actually, I think I have been in a controlling relationship, or this really relates to something I was in. And even, not just controlling, but friendships as well. Friendships can be controlling and toxic. So I think it's just really healthy. And I think as well, there's so much pressure when we're young to be in a relationship, when actually I think it's so much more important. I know this sounds so hippie-ish and, but this is something that I wish I'd known when I was younger, that it's okay to be on your own. It's okay to be single, and learn to love yourself. Because once you find that and you have the strength to love yourself, then no one can hurt you, because you've got that strength in yourself, and you love yourself so much that you won't let somebody get to you like that. But it takes a long time to be that person, to be that strong. And teenagers, it's hard, because you just want to have that love and affection from somebody else. So yeah, I just think it's so important. But if you're growing up in that environment, and your parents who you love, or your mum who you love's going through that, it is going to have such a damaging impact on you. So I just think it's, we just need to have the conversations out, healthy conversations about it.
We've got a comment coming in now, which is lovely. Thanks, Eve, for bringing these issues to mainstream literature. People really need to hear these stories, and I think that is just so true of all of your books. I keep going back to the point that we don't know any different. We think it's all right. We think everything's all right. We think this is the norm. We don't understand, that it's not the norm. And you point about being true to yourself as a young person, thinking that you should be in a relationship. It's all peer pressure. It's all friends pressure. It's all, who you should be. And actually, the best thing my mum ever said to me was, "To thine own self be true."
Yeah, that's a lovely one. Yeah, very true.
We have another there. I think the books would be very eye-opening for people.
Oh, thank you. That's lovely.
Just a little bit about the perhaps the research. You talk about the B&Bs, you talk about the hostels and the women's refuge. Can you tell me a little bit about the research that you did for the book? I mean, obviously it's from your background, as you've already said.
Yeah, so a lot of it came from when I was working as pastoral. I was working in pastoral support initially, and then I actually moved into child protection role in the school. So a lot of any domestic violence cases were referred to me initially, and then I'd work closely with social services to help and support students in the school. Unfortunately, there were quite a few domestic violence cases that I was dealing with. There was one case in particular that has stayed with me and still stays with me to this day. They're awful. I mean, a lot of them, social services are limited to what they can do, especially when it's teenagers as well, unfortunately, to what they can actually do. And if it's emotional abuse as well, it's really hard to prove. And emotional abuse can be really tricky to prove. So I was dealing with some really draining, awful cases. But there were some cases as well where we were working to help move and relocate families. So, I was liaising with hostels and family rescues. So I have had quite a lot of work with those sort of places. So, I've got quite a lot of experience with that. So luckily I had that kind of background to know about it. But I've also spoken to families and worked with families who have been moved from place to place, and it is so draining, and it makes the process so hard as well. It's what makes it, I guess, tempting to go back to your home, because it's so hard to uproot your family and live in one room and not knowing if you're going to get a house, because the hostel's not always nice places to live, and it's just a horrible, really, sometimes, for these poor people. They go through so much, and my heart really does go out for them. And I've worked with some really brave families that have gone through an awful lot.
I think that's the operative word, brave. You have it's the bravery, because it's talked about. It's in so many songs. It's in so many films. And you've got to find that inner strength to get up, and especially you do it for your children. You're not going to let what's happened to you happen to your children.
No.
You know, when Viv gets Henry, and then she gets sorry, the baby's name.
Oh God,
Amy.
Amy.
When she gets
a new one,
when she gets Henry and when she gets Amy, then she gets an inner strength, because she's not going to let Ross hurt them. But the book is full of such lovely relationships. It's not all bad relationships. Relationships are they're very key to the book. They're very key to Magpie. We have the bad relationships. We see Ross, who's doesn't mean to be bad, and that's the worst type of bad character to me. That's the worst type of bad guy, who was really, you know, he strokes Alice's hair and says, I love you, I'm going to be your friend, I'm going to be, you know, your new dad and all this, and he's so toxic underneath. He's like a different character. He kind of turns into this horrible person. And then we've got Chloe and we've got Esme, and they're horrible at school. And I know what it's like to be at school when you're the one that's got holes in your socks and untrendy clothes.
That was me.
And that is so cruel to a child. That is so cruel. So, and the way you've written the characters, Chloe and Esme, they're so real. But then there's such a lovely set of good relationships that you balance it with. And even though the book is about a very hard-hitting subject, it's a lovely story as well, because it's the story of, well, success. It's the story of rebirth. It's the story of new beginnings. And we get the lovely relationships that she has with her mum. She has a lovely relationship with Alfie's dad.
Yeah, she does.
And then there are the good guys. There's Mrs. Monroe, there's Lauren, and there's Ben. Where'd you get your characters from?
Oh God, I don't know actually. They just pop up in my head, and I just can't.
Are they based on people you know?
Really, I don't think. I think I've just got a weird brain. I just make them up. I guess Mrs. Monroe's probably come from people that I've worked with. You know, I've worked with some amazing teachers, and you know, I've got so much time for the teaching profession because they're just wonderful. You know, they do so much good. You know, they really do. The secondary schools that I've worked with some amazing teachers, and they go out their way to work with some really complex children. So I guess Mrs. Monroe is probably a combination of some of the teachers that I've worked with. But the other characters, I don't know, they just pop up in my head and I just get them and I just think, oh, you know, I mean, Alfie is an extension of my son a little bit because, you know, he's a big footballer and he's got a lot of empathy, and I think he's probably, you know, maybe an extension of him. But I don't know, the dad just came, he just got created in my brain, you know, because he's like quite a typical bloke and bald-headed, you know, but he's actually so kind and he's had so much go on in his life, because obviously he's lost and he's lost his wife, and to begin with he struggles to show his emotion, but then he does, you know, and he's just grown so much, I think, as a person. So I've got a lot of time for Alfie's dad. I think he's really lovely. I don't know. I think I always say this, but I think I'm a bit of a magpie as well. So I tend to sort of pluck things up and mix them up in like a big mixing bowl in my brain. I think I do that with characters. So I might meet people and see people and I mix them up and kind of create this new, like, Frankenstein character in my brain. I think that's just how it happens.
I just think authors are so gifted. You're so talented. I've spoken to quite a few authors, and they say, "Oh, the characters are sitting on my shoulder. The characters are telling me the story." So you have some lovely characters. You also have some lovely imagery in the book. You set it by the sea. Where is there a particular place where they go to by the sea? Why by the sea?
Yeah, with Lost, I had the setting before anything else, really. I knew I was going to do it about grief. And then I just could see Alfie, the sort of boy, and I could just see him walking along this coast in my head. So I knew it was going to be by the sea. I just had this image of him looking out to the sea. So I knew it had to be a coastal setting. So kind of in my head, I mean, I live in Crawley, which isn't too far from there, quite near Brighton. But I didn't want it to be Brighton because that was too busy. So it's kind of like an amalgamation of sort of Little Hampton Bognor, which is quite near me as well. It's sort of like that sort of place. So it's like a sort of amalgamation of that sort of place. A sort of towny seasidey resort. Not as big as Brighton, if that makes sense. It's in my brain. I can see it. It's kind of made up, but it's kind of an amalgamation of Littlehampton, Bognor, Place.
Were you conscious of the imagery that you were creating, the kind of, you know, the churning sea that's out there and the churning that's going on in the characters?
Yeah, I can see it quite well in my head. You know, there's this really big tree there, the lightning tree that I created. So I can see a lot of it in my head still. I mean, it is entirely made up. There's not a place like it, but it's like a amalgamation of a few places. I'm weird with settings. I don't really like to, because some authors do set it in places that are, you know, well known. Mm-hmm. But it's like 7 Days and Crush are all set in a type of London, but it's not London. It's like a Croydon, but it's kind of my Croydon. You know, I kind of make it my own, if that makes sense. I kind of create my own little worlds, because then I can do what I want with it, really. I should be a fantasy writer.
If it's too near to somewhere, then people are going to start thinking, no, it's not like that. It's not like that. But if it's you can do what you want in your own setting, can't you?
Yeah, I mean, I've been restricted a bit because my most recent books have been the historical books, the Dick Girl books. So they're written in real places. So that's written in Preston. So I've been working really closely with the historian to make sure I get everything dead right, you know, all the street names right and everything right. And that's the first time I've been really like, right, I've got to make sure that I get everything, you know, dead on, which is great. You know, it's just a different challenge. But that's the first time I've actually had to make sure I get the settings as they actually are, rather than, oh, yeah, I can just put this tree here and put this house here. And so it's just a different challenge.
Which leads me on to something that I was going to ask. You've got a job, you've written so many books, you're such a busy lady. Are you very disciplined? Would you say you were very disciplined as an author?
Yeah, I am. I mean, I found, so I work part-time in a school library, and I found that when I wasn't working part-time, so I had a couple of years where I was just writing, and I found that actually I was finding that harder because I had more time. So I find it easier when I haven't got as much time, if that makes sense, because then I set myself restrictions. So I tend to, on my days off, I tend to make sure that I write in the mornings, and I have to write a certain amount of words. So I give myself quite tight deadlines. And then on the days that I work, that's when I tend to maybe do a bit of editing in the evenings or a bit of reading. So it's quite nice because it gives me routine and structure. And I'm better when I've got deadlines and routine and structure. I tend to get more done. Whereas if I've got all the time in the world, I think, oh, I've got another day, I could do that. You know, I'm not as good. So I think it works better for me to have like deadlines and a tight routine to follow. So if anybody's really airy-fairy about their writing, I think that's the best way to do it. I mean, I wrote 7 days when I was working full-time and I had 2 really young kids. And I wrote that really quickly because I used to do it in the 14 minutes between bath times and EastEnders. And I used to say, right, that is my time to write. And I just used to write it every evening and make myself do it.
Make yourself do it. Oh, yeah. Dear. Eve, who would you say has influenced and inspired you as a writer? Do you have any names for us?
Yeah, so do you mean writers or other people?
Well, I was thinking of other writers. Who's writing do you admire? Whose writing do you think might have influenced?
So I think growing up it was Jacqueline Wilson's early books. So a lot of them are out of print now, but her early work I was really, really inspired by, because she was writing the kind of gritty books that no one else was doing at the time. I remember reading a book about a mum having a nervous breakdown, and she'd literally wet herself and sit. I think it was called Waiting for the Sky to Fall or something. I don't even think you can get it anymore. But, you know, I was just blown away by it because that was the sort of thing I was trying to write when I was a kid, you know, because I've always loved gritty writing. Judy Bloom, when I was growing up, absolutely adored her because, again, she was writing real life, you know, issues that I loved. And as I'm getting, you know, now, the sort of writers that I admire, Holly Bourne's a great writer, very reflective for teenagers. In our school library, the sort of books that fly out is those sort of books. Karen David, I think, is a great writer. And Stephen King, as a general writer, I think is a very talented writer because he's so good at changing genres, and he's so good at Stephen King at character. And that's something I love, character. That's something I love personally, like doing character writing. And Stephen King is just the king of it. So he's really, really good at drawing really good characters. Which
brings us on to Sue Spencer's comment. She said, it's lovely that your characters sound like they're treasured members of your family. That's a lovely thing to write.
They are actually, yeah. I'm very protective over them. Very often when I do school talks, the kids ask, who's your favourite character or what's your favourite book? And I can never answer the question because I always feel like I'm having to pick a child. And I'm like, I don't want to do that. Please don't let me do that. Yeah, they do feel special because I guess they are part of my life now. They are part of me. Yeah, they do feel part of my family. Very odd, isn't it, really?
Well, but yeah. No, I don't think so, because if they didn't feel part of your family, if you didn't feel sympathy for your characters, I mean, the characters are so beautifully drawn, they're so wonderful, whether it's the bad guys or the good guys. All the characters in Magpie and in Lost, you can actually identify with, you can feel how they feel, and I think that's a good writer.
I don't really believe in bad guys. That's the thing. I think that was the one thing that I really wanted to get across in my writing, is I don't believe in bad guys. So even when I'm writing so I've written bullies, I've written, abusive partner and crush, all of them I try and show why they might be like what they're like, because I don't really believe in bad guys, because I think everyone's a bad guy for a reason. The reason why we're like what we are. And that was one of the reasons why I love this documentary I was watching, because they're showing domestic charity. They're actually working intensely with men that are violent to try and work why they're being violent, because there's so much stigma about it that men aren't going forward and saying I need help because they don't want to admit to it. And I think that's what we need to break down. We need to break down actually, we're not all, there's not actually such thing as a bad person. As a person who, there's a problem there, and we need to work on it and try and sort it out, if that makes sense. I'm not articulating it very well today.
No, it does. It makes perfect sense. I've always had a lot of time for teenagers, because I think it's a very difficult time in your life, and it's something that everybody goes through, and we are all a product of the way we've been brought up. We're all a product of what we've seen.
Exactly.
And so, and it's like you've referred to it a couple of times in the conversation. People are the way they are for a reason. And once you know that reason, then you can very often, break down, and people are allowed to change. People should be given a second chance.
Definitely.
And if you know the backstories, then you've got more. I think you've got more empathy. I think you're a better person yourself if you can see why these things are happening. Can we talk a little bit about being a school librarian?
Yeah, certainly.
I was a school librarian for a short time after I qualified, and I absolutely loved it. The kids were great. They were all full of problems and full of, there were some little monsters there, but again, they were monsters for a reason. But the YA audience is something that I think a lot of people, whether it's parents or librarians, public librarians, school librarians, struggle to find the right book for the right children. Do you have any books or writers that you would recommend for our audience? Anything that what are your kids reading at the moment?
God, I'm trying to think what they're reading at the moment. It's flying out. But yeah, I mean, it is tricky trying to get kids to read the right books, because it's all wimpy kids and Tom Gates, which is great, but it's trying to get that range out there, trying to get kids to read different things. Which is so important. So Lisa Thompson, I always tend to try and recommend. Sue Woolman's a great writer. She tends to write more thrillery books. What is it we were recommending the other day? So Karen David, I've said earlier on, she's a really good writer. She just had her book out about What We're Scared Of, which is a great book. Oh God, what have we got? You caught me on the spot. The Gilded One has just come out, fantasy book that's just flown out of our shelves, which is a really, really good book. I mean, there's such a range, isn't there? Robert Muchmore is always popular in our library. They're always going out quite quickly. I mean, the key for me really is just to try and find out. So, for example, when I started, it was trying to get boys to read. Boys is always the key thing, trying to get the boys reading. And I remember having a conversation with some of the boys, and they were like, "Oh, I don't like reading. Miss, I don't like reading." But you know, I've got someone reading Alex Wheatle because he's really good at writing very urban books, you know, with a really good voice. And a couple of my boys are just swallowing those up. They absolutely love them. And Kwame Alexander, who's written the book and those sporty books, you know, so he's really popular as well. And there are a couple of boys that wouldn't normally read. So because they've got really good voices, those types of books. And Bally Ray's another one who's really popular. So you know, it's those sort of books that tend to be quite popular in our library because it's quite a big school, our one. It covers quite a range of what's the word I'm looking for? Quite a range of readership, you know. So we've got some low readers and very high readers. So those types of books have been doing really well. I mean, Alex Wheatle, I'm always pushing at people because, you know, he's so good at writing. You know, very good urban. He's got a lovely voice, which I just find. Oh, and Fleece Lawrence as well. Fleece Lawrence is a really good one for our sort of setting as well because she writes really good, diverse voice. Could be quite a diverse school as well. So yeah, Fleece Lawrence, Alex Wheatle, Sarah Barnard's popular. My books are popular.
I think your books definitely should be recommended and should have a shelf of their own. I just think there are so many good books out there. It can be a nightmare, and it's you know, people come along to a public library and the shelves are full of books, all's fine on, and you know, and it's finding something that pushes you. I'm thinking about reluctant readers, and I'm thinking about people, you know, there are a lot of children, a lot of boys would much, including my boys were like this. They'd much rather be outside, much more be doing something else, building car engines or tinkering about something than reading. And they've come to reading as adults. They've read more as adults. And I think when parents are concerned about finding that hook that will get their children to read. So I think it's always nice if somebody can give some recommendations, and then it gives you something to look for, something to go for.
It is hard. I think with boys, I mean, you know, definitely the Alex Wheatle, the Kwame Alexanders. I mean, a lot of them read the Football Academy books as well, and I can't remember what they're called, but they're the football classics, but they're all like the books about Messi and that sort of thing. They're very popular. They thought they'd fly off the shelves, and they're still reading. The graphic books are brilliant as well. So we've got a good graphic range, and they're all on the Accelerated Reader as well. And I think that people think that if it's not it's not an actual fiction book, but you know, it's getting kids reading. And a lot of our boys, they love reading non-fiction, and that's fantastic. Because I think, well, as long as they're reading, you know, it's great. So a lot of them are taking out books on fishing or on car maintenance or whatever. But you know, it's still reading. So I think as long as we're encouraging reading and they're getting that interest, you know, you will find your passion, your love. And I think as long as we're not pushing it too hard. But a lot of them that have said, "Oh, Miss, I'll never read a book. I hate it." You know, I've managed to find something that, you know, they will read and they'll like, because there's so many different wonderful writers out there. But graphic books, I find, go really well. If they're really not very keen on reading, I find graphic books are a really good source in sometimes, because it's just sometimes it can be a bit scary, can't it?
I'll just put a plug in for our press reader there. We Kirklees Library subscribe to a press reader, which is something that you can access using your library card, and it's access to all newspapers and magazines. So we can, you know, if you don't want to sit down with the whole book, then sign up to press reader with your library card and read something like Match. You know, read the comics, read the magazines, So we'll just throw that in there, and then we'll go back to my screen's gone off. Right, just a minute. Okay, so what are we doing for time? We've got to 5:02. We've talked about that. Stories. The book cover. I've got a note down here to remember to mention the book cover, because I think isn't it? It is beautiful. And the author, Alette Strathoff.
Yeah, Strathoff. I think it is.
Strathoff it is. Yeah. I think sometimes we you know, you can't judge a book by the cover sort of idea that we talk about. And I think the covers have a lot to do with getting teenagers to read. And I do think this is such a beautiful cover. It's such a lovely subject. And just the title. I was going to ask you about the title, but we've got why you chose the title. Did you have the title before you did the story, or does the story come before the title?
I am really funny, so I love to have the title before I begin a book. And if I haven't got the title, I can't really begin. So I'm a bit weird like that. So even as I was finishing Lost, and I kind of knew that I was going to carry on Alice's story, I knew in my head it was going to be Magpie. I kind of like single titles. I think they're quite effective. And, you know, Alice in my head was always kind of this magpie character. And I talk about Magpie a lot because I think I'm a bit of a magpie, and I love the birds anyway. So, yeah, it just fitted. It fitted so well with her. And, yeah, when they sent me the cover, I was just like, oh, my God. Because sometimes, you know, with covers, you go, oh, yeah, it's nice. I like it, you know, but you're not like, wow, you know. But this one, I was just like, oh, my God, I love it. I just love it so much. Because it just fits it so well, you know. It's just like, I love the fact that she's sitting there and the magpies are all around her, and it's just lovely. And I just think it just stands out because there's not many, you know, we work in a school library. I can say there's not many black covers that look so pretty. So I think it just sort of stands out quite a bit. Yeah, I was just really happy with it. It wasn't, you know, she's so clever anyway as an illustrator.
How much do you have to do with it then? How much do you have to do with this? Do you tell her what you'd like, or do you just give her the context and she comes up with it?
No, nothing. It's very rare an author has much impact in the cover. So you kind of give them your, you know,
brief.
Yeah, no, not even a brief. That you kind of just let them do it, and then they send it to you. If you had any problems, if you were really like not happy with it, then they would, you know, they take in your comments. But really, you just put your faith in the publisher and the illustrator to do their bit, because that is their, you know, that's their talent. They do it, and I haven't had any problems with any of my. I've been really fortunate with all my publishers. Actually, I've been with 3 publishers, and I've been so lucky with my covers because they've all been fab. So I've never had a problem. The only one I was a bit dubious with was Crush, because I wondered whether it was a bit too girly at the time, you know, because it was pink. But it did really well. I mean, you know, it was effective. But yeah, I mean, I've just been, you know, I've been really lucky with my covers.
I think it's gorgeous. And I share your love of magpies, although I do think it's one for sorrow, two for joy.
It is, yeah. I still salute.
So do I. And if I only see one, I'm guilty of kind of hanging around to find out where its mate is, because I don't like to move until I've seen 2.
I do. So, I drive my family mad. They're like, "Oh, Mum, you're so silly," and I'm like, "No, I've got to see 2." But you know,
it's crazy. Other superstitions don't bother me that much, you know. I mean, I haven't walked under a black cat for ages, or dropped myself on a ladder or whatever. Yeah. So let me see now. Back to being sensible. So I started off by saying that you think that books are a gateway to conversation, and I read something which was a review from an 11-year-old. I think it was it Books Up North or something, and she said that reading this book made me feel grateful that I don't have someone horrible in my life, and it helped me to understand how difficult some people's lives really are. And I just thought that was a lovely comment about the book. It helps people. It is the book that's the gateway to the conversation.
Yeah, exactly. That's all I want, really. And it helps that empathy, doesn't it? You know, if somebody, you know, you might not be going through it yourself, but maybe your friend might be going through it, or somebody that, you know of. So it just helps that empathy. It just helps those conversations be had. And just raises awareness, because you might not be going through it now, but God forbid it might happen in the future, or it might happen to someone you know. And you know, it's just building those building blocks, isn't it, of knowledge, you know. And I just think that's what books are. They just give you that knowledge and understanding, and just help you along the way. So, you know, you can just have a little bit more knowledge, then that's only a good thing, isn't it?
So there's just one thing I'd like to mention. I'll put this up because Scholastic have a resource for schools if you want to use the book for schools. So I'll put that up as well. And that is I don't know whether I can't show you the flyer. I can't show you the resource. But if you're teachers and you're out there and you want to look at the resource, it is a really good resource for starting conversations. to use the book Magpie with your class. Have I said the right thing there, Eve?
Yeah, that's perfect.
Yeah, thank you. So we'll take that off. And what's next for Eve Ainsworth? What's coming next?
Well, so we've got Know My Place coming out, which is with Barrington Stoke. So that's a book about foster care. So a young girl who's just been moved into a new foster placement, and she's feeling a little bit nervous about it because her last foster placement has just broken down. So, it's been a bit tricky for her. So that's about foster placement and about how tricky that whole process can be. So that's quite a personal one as well, because that's something that I've worked with. And then I've got 2 books coming out next year. So I've got another Dick Kerr girls book coming out. So that's all about the first ever football team. So it's a historical series about the first ever girls football team. So it's been a lovely series to write, completely different for me, but amazing to write.
So this will be the third one, won't it? The third one, yeah. Third football, yeah.
Yeah, so that comes out next year. So then the complete series will be out. But they can all be read separately. They're all kind of separate stories as well. And then another Barrington Stoke one, which I'm just writing now, will be out next year, which is football again. I think I've got this football thing going on, but that's for slightly younger readers, that one. So it'll be a middle grade one coming out next year. So I'm writing that one now. So yeah.
Things to watch for, which takes me back to one of the earlier questions. How on earth do you fit everything in?
Yeah, I don't know really. It's all a bit mad. I don't know. I juggle a lot.
I don't know how you concentrate on the book. That's the secret.
Yeah, very good husband.
I don't know how you concentrate on the book you're writing when you've got all these new ideas floating around in your head at the same time.
Yeah, it does drive me a bit crazy sometimes, but yeah, I don't know. I think my brain's like a compartment. I have lots of different bits stored away. Right.
Well, I've really enjoyed this morning. Thank you so much for coming to talk to us. I'm going to go back to see if I can just do this. I'm going to go back to there, and I'm going to find. Let's see if I can find the right slide. That one. I'm going to leave that up. I'm going to leave that up for a minute because while I'm talking, because I think there are just so many lovely titles there that I want people to write down and go and look for and read, because I think your work is so valuable and I think the way you write is lovely. So thank you very much for coming along. Can I just ask, are you happy to stay with us while I talk about what's coming up next?
Yeah, of course.
Right, I'll leave the picture up so that people can write those things down. So this is the regular Tuesday Library Adventures Live, but we do have special ones sometimes, which we call Library Adventures Live Plus. And on Thursday of this week, we have a LAL Plus, which is an Eid special. So it's journalist, editor and interviewer Sarah Schaffer. And Sarah's coming to talk to us about her book, All About Eve, which is this one. Let's just do there. That's All About Eve. So that's the one that we're talking about on Thursday. And then go back to the right slide. So that's what we're talking about on Thursday, and it's a celebratory event, for Eid ul-Fitr, which is the 12th and the 13th of May. So the 13th is the Thursday, so that's when we are talking about the celebration of Eid, and it's activities and fun galore. So in here we've got recipes, we've got information, we've got recipes, we've got things that you can do, we've got crafts, and that's going to be a really fun session, and that's on Thursday at 11 o'clock. Now, after that, we go back to our regular Thursday slot, and Tuesday slot, and next week our regular Tuesday slot is with John Aggard and Pierre Grobler, and their session is all about the picture book Coyote Soundbite. Now, Coyote Soundbite is a poem for our planet, and it will be a special performance by one of Britain's foremost cross-cultural voices, John Aggard. And we're delighted that inventive illustrator Pierre Grobler will also be with us, and he'll be live from Portugal. So that's 2 things coming up. Look out for the Eid on Thursday and look out for next week. Now, if I take that out and just come back to us, we are now a couple of minutes over. But Eve, thank you so much for coming to join us today. Congratulations on all your lovely books, and lots of success with your writing in the future.
Thank you
very much. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye now.